Now, in this week's budget, the Chancellor reduced help to the disabled through personal independence payments by £3.2 billion across this Parliament. 370,000 disabled people will lose an average of £3,500 each. His announcement ruffled a lot of feathers in both houses of Parliament and in all the political parties, including losing the Conservative Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Ian Duncan-Smith. Now, it doesn't matter that the Chancellor was right when he said we will actually see spending on personal independence payments for the disabled rise by £1 billion by 2021. The rise is not as big as he originally promised, and as a result, some of the least able members of society will get less help in the future than they had originally been led to expect. So, suffering will inevitably rise. Ian Duncan-Smith, in his resignation letter, said they should be finding the best way to better focus resources on those most in need. Here's our question this morning for our first debate. Should a society be judged by the way it treats its less fortunate? In a general sense, Richard Enoch, do you think in our society we have got our priorities right?
Sure, I think the balance is about right, and this budget is about right. We need a society with lots of capitalism and lots of compassion. Now, within the welfare budget, whether or not we're spending on those that need it most, that's always been a very tense and difficult issue, and I get that. But the big picture is, I mean, the top 10% of taxpayers are currently paying about half the income tax that gets paid. That's right and proper. So, yeah, we are about right. And what's more, we are a little bit more socialist than America, which is what you'd expect, and a bit less than Denmark or the Scandinavians, which is what you'd expect. I mean, Britain feels to me as though we're just about where you'd expect us to be.
Owen Jones.
No. And people like me have been saying for many years that the cuts which affect disproportionately low-income and poor people are ideologically driven, that the idea we're all in it together is a nonsense, and who's now echoed that? That well-known lefty Ian Duncan-Smith. Now, look, just give me an example. Two different benefit claimants. One, the most lavish benefit claimant in the country, the banks. They plunged us into economic disaster, hundreds of billions of pounds of money, but very few strings attached. They carried on paying record bonuses to those at the top, not lending to small businesses and so on. Yeah. I'll give you another example. A 60-year-old man, Stephen Taylor, army veteran, and he was desperately looking for work, and if you're 60 years old and out of work, it's really tough, but he tried his best. And he was selling poppies for the Royal Legion, selling poppies for maimed and injured former comrades of his. Now, he had his benefits stopped, sanctioned, on the basis his volunteering for the Royal Legion showed he wasn't trying hard enough to look for work. So compare and contrast. If you're rich and powerful, the state will come rushing to your rescue. For those at the bottom of society, you're expected to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Richard, I'll come back to you. Rupert Darwell, former advisor to Norman Lamont. I saw you kind of making a quizzical, disapproving face when Owen mentioned the banks.
I slightly winced because about the banks. I mean, it's a good debating point, but if the banks hadn't been rescued, there would have been a financial collapse.
Not the point.
There would have been a financial collapse, and the damage to the country would have been. And it was Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown who did that.
Just so you know, the point I was making is no strings attached. That's the point. They carried on behaving much as they always did. It's that sense of one rule for those at the top, one rule for everybody else. The state will be very strict with people at the bottom of society.
And the fines levied on the banks, in fact, for mis-selling, but have been absolutely humongous and have actually damaged their ability to lend. I mean, you have to ask whether that was the right thing to do, to punish the banks for the mis-selling, because there is a consequential effect in terms of their ability to lend.
What do you believe should be the philosophy behind welfare in this country?
I think there are two issues. One is people of pensionable age, and then there's people of working age. And the problem with that, I think the principle that should be followed with people of working age is the one that Bill Clinton enunciated in the mid-1990s, that if you work full-time, you will not be poor. If you have kids at home and you work full-time, you will not be poor. And that welfare should be temporary and should help people get back to work.
But what we're talking about here is not the people who can get a job, it's the people who are discriminated against in the job market. It is the disabled. You know, it's very, very hard to go out even to use public transport. In London, you know, a fraction of the tube system is accessible. You can't get on the buses. You can't get on the trains. Even finding the space to go to a job interview is tough. People are being certified fit for work under this current government, and within weeks they are dying. You know, these are government facts that the government...
How do you fill if there aren't cuts, how do you fill the £4 billion black hole in the finances?
Look, there is enough money. We are the 5th richest nation in the world. The problem is the money is in the wrong hands. Now you go not so far over to Germany, you find they're spending 43% of their gross domestic product on public expenditure. We're heading, you know, back to about 34%.
Richard.
There is about 100 billion more we could be putting in public expenditure.
I'm inclined to feel that the disabled deserve a great deal of help and that many old people don't. So, for instance, I think we have been far too protective of pensions for rich pensioners.
That's a vote loser there.
No, I'm not interested in votes. I'm interested in trying to work out the moral rightness of things. It strikes me that at the moment we are way too protective of rich pensioners, and we could be squeezing them without them even noticing it and helping the disabled more. Quite possibly it's they who need to help.
Piers makes a very good point, and I know you're not looking for votes, and so you don't have to pander. And that's the beauty of you, Richard.
Yeah, well, but the vote thing is about saying to the vast swathes of society, hang on, please vote for people who remember that the rich old don't need as much help as the disabled young.
Piers Corbyn.
Yeah, the people who are protected too much in this society are the super rich. What we have is a government committed. This government is committed to an economic system that makes the super rich richer and richer and the rest of us suffer. That is a totally wrong framework that must be changed.
There's quite a profound limit to how much it is worth squeezing the rich. I've already said it. The rich are paying a good deal of tax. Whether it's worth making them pay...
Come on, the super rich own over half the world.
It doesn't matter what they own. What matters is what they
all
pay
our incomes could be doubled if they're squeezed a bit. Do you realise that? All of them.
Yes.
All our incomes could be doubled.
Well, I think Ben Harris-Quinney from the Boat Group. Okay, let's get back to this week, perhaps a little bit. How do businesses, investors and entrepreneurs paying less capital gains tax and less corporation tax, how does that help everyone?
I think when people heard that policy, some people would have thought, oh, this is another policy to help fat cats. But actually, a lot of the poorest people in this country are those that have started up small businesses and are actually operating without a salary for the first few years. The big corporations, as we all know, pay almost no tax at all. So I think cutting the corporation tax where the Chancellor has should have the effect to grow jobs and give more people prosperity.
Boost business, boost jobs.
Right. But I think there is a wider point here in terms of going back to the disability benefit cuts, is that there isn't, I don't think there's a problem with society in terms of how the British society as a whole feels about disabled people. I think we're all in agreement. The problem is the leadership of the Conservative Party, not only do they not represent the country, they don't even represent the Conservative Party itself. As Ian Duncan Smith has proven, the majority of the Conservative Party don't want to see cuts being made on the backs of the poorest and most vulnerable people. And it's important that I think that everyone in the country understands that.
Nicky, you talk about how we're going to fill that hole in the accounts, of the nation's accounts, and that's the point. It's about choices, because we have a situation where they will cut support for disabled people, whilst at the same time effectively funding that cut. Or making up for that, if you like, by cutting capital gains tax, which disproportionately only benefits the top 3%. I think this is the problem as a society.
Well, let's nail that one. Does it disproportionately?
No, it doesn't. I mean, if you look
at 66% goes to the top 5%.
The Bow Group opposed tax credit cuts, which was another, I think, wrong-headed approach from the Chancellor that would have affected the poorest and most vulnerable in society. But a huge proportion of those people that are taking tax credit cuts are those that have started up small businesses.
You're absolutely correct.
And I think that proves that everyone that runs a business is not a fat cat that is only.
We should distinguish actually between smaller businesses and big business. That point about tax.
But smaller businesses become big businesses.
Well, just to give you an example about
they won't if they're too heavily taxed.
The point about tax avoidance.
What would you cut? Okay, I mean, is there a problem, Owen, having this government having ring-fenced the budget for the NHS and education? Is that a problem? Because it limits their room for manoeuvre elsewhere.
Well, actually, Nicky, the NHS is actually going through the longest squeeze in its funding since it was founded, so it actually needs more resources, not least because of an aging society. But look, but the point I think is this, actually, in terms of tax avoidance is a really important point, because smaller businesses can't avoid the tax. Local coffee shops and bookshops are being driven out of business by the likes of Starbucks. And do you know what happens? We have accountancy firms seconded to government, helping to draw up tax laws. Then they go off and tell their clients how to avoid the laws they've written. Can you imagine benefit claimants seconded to the Department of Work and Pensions to draw up legislation on social security?
The point is those corporations you talk about, they weren't paying corporation tax in the first place. I mean, what was Starbucks paying? Like 2 million in tax? It's absolutely unbelievable.
Rupert Darwell, you want to come back in here? I see your eyes twinkling.
Yeah, well, you've got to expect corporations will obey the letter of the law. You can't say you should go beyond the letter of the law and pay more tax than you're legally obliged to. I mean, that's just a fact of life.
This government could be asking a lot more from corporations. They've misjudged their position.
And furthermore, the problem has been the tax code has been getting much longer, which means the scope for avoidance and the amount that is spent on tax avoidance will go up.
Can I just say two things on that? Because, I mean, the first point is some businesses choose not to exploit the law. The whole point of tax avoidance is you're intentionally trying to go against the spirit of the law without going against the letter of the law. Now, we should, the reality is, we're not going to compare benefit fraud to tax avoidance. People go, well, benefit fraud is illegal, tax avoidance isn't, and that's the point, because the law cracks down on the misdemeanours of the poor, but allows or even facilitates far worse
It's not a misdemeanour. By definition, it's not a misdemeanour.
Richard. Welfare budget, I think, was 41% a few years ago of our total government spending. I think it's now 35% of total government spending. Needs are much more for it now because of growing population. And what should we do? I mean, what should the philosophy on welfare be? In your world, what would it be?
For me, I'd get the state out of it. I would have the system broadly contributory, which is how the welfare state was invented to be. And if we move towards that's good. You pay in, you get out. But of
How would that work?
But,
Privatised?
Well, I would have most provision would be by private firms, by cooperatives, by charities, and most people would be insuring against their needs, saving against their needs, and of course there are some people who can't or won't, and for them, the rich, more or less, have to pay for them to get access to this system. That would be my ideal.
The 19th century, in other words.
Actually,
Back to the future.
Actually, no, the 19th century with utterly transformed politics, the 19th century in a hugely much richer society. But yes, I do think the welfare state has been a mistake, and I do think that we will go and grow beyond it, and we will have a society in which capitalism and compassion are well matched.
Liz, there's nothing. Listen, Liz wants to go. Liz, there's nothing wrong with thinking the unthinkable, Liz.
I think this is ridiculous.
It's been said before, and it's ridiculous.
There are all sorts of problems in society that we need a collective response to.
Are we all in this together?
We're not all in this together. And one of the things that was striking about the budget, we're going to talk about climate change in a minute, is there is another massive handout for the oil and gas industry. The budget was all about choices, and it's all about which bits of society are going to get the tax cuts and which bits are going to get supported. And the budget was a deeply unfair, regressive budget, but it was also a dirty budget that's actually going to make it harder for us to tackle massive problems like climate change.
OK, let's hear from the audience. The thoughts on this? I question. Let's focus on this. Should society be judged by how it treats less fortunate? It's Rachel, isn't it? Hi, Rachel.
Hi. I don't know how they can justify cutting anything where they're still allowing tax evasion for the richest people in the country. And like she was saying, the bailouts for fossil fuels, people like Starbucks and Amazon are getting away with it, and then they're taking the money back. Also, I'd like to say that what they talk about in benefit fraud is never mentioned that fraud figure includes all the overpayments and mistakes that the government, that the benefit system makes. They all go into the calculation of how much people are being fraudulent, and who would want to be on benefits? It's not like we're all at the Hilton drinking champagne and lighting cigars with your £20 notes. It's tough being on benefits.
Mm-hmm. OK, Zora.
Hi.
Hi, Zora.
My issue is I work full-time. I'm also a benefit recipient. I get DLA, which was cut as soon as I started working, and my needs hadn't changed at that point. I've had a condition that I've had since birth that's unchangeable, but my benefits changed as soon as I started working. I have to pay for expensive wheelchairs, equipment, and that comes out of my wages because I don't get enough DLA to cover those expenses.
It's been an anxious time.
Exactly. I also work as a social worker, and I'm privy to a personal level in terms of the cuts, and also I'm seeing the wave of the impact that's having on people in the community, people that are unheard, that don't have a voice, that aren't empowered. And I think that's the issue here, that people aren't empowered to have voices. There isn't a rise in the community in terms of the acknowledgement of the people that are suffering. and, you know, that are in their homes that can't get out, that can't get the care packages that they need because of that, particularly in adult social care. And I'm very worried about the future in terms of the level of cuts, particularly from last budget when it said even more needs to go in terms of cuts.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we're talking about, perhaps, we got this from Owen, we got this from Jonathan, a total transformation of our society going ahead. Alison?
Do you know one of the things that I find absolutely infuriating? I have a very elderly, frail husband, and we have a blue badge, quite rightly, because he can hardly walk. And looking at society, the whole thing is we don't care really about the disabled, because you go for a disabled parking place and who's in there? Somebody without a blue badge. And if you speak to them, what do they say? Oh, I'm only going to be a minute. This is an attitude of society about disabled, and it absolutely infuriates me because people simply don't care.
Do you think there are some people who are playing the system?
Oh, definitely. We have a carer to look after my husband. I was talking to her yesterday that I was coming here, and she said to me, well, I know of a person who's got a mobility car, and both she and her husband work, and they've had all sorts of things, and she was absolutely furious the way that they are sort of playing or have played the system.
Do you think that's a big problem?
I don't know, but I know some people do, but other people deservedly need those benefits, and rightly so.
So Jonathan, how do we target the people that actually do need the money? Do you think that's a significant...
I'm interested why these debates always go down this line, and they play into the way the government wants to frame the debate, which is there are the deserving and the undeserving. Actually, we need to move beyond this. Now, I mean, one of the proposals that the Green Party has is that there is a basic income, and actually when you look right across society, everyone pretty much gets a basic income. You get some benefits or you get a tax break. Everyone gets a level. Now, the tax system and the benefit system is extremely complicated. We could save a lot of money by simplifying it right across the board. Then when you do have people with impairments who are disabled, you give them extra top-ups. So you get past this issue around fraud. And actually there is more benefits that people aren't claiming that they're entitled to than people defrauding the system. And so actually, on balance, we're a much better society. There aren't loads and loads of people trying to get what they can. There are people actually that are entitled
to things
that they're not claiming.
You believe that's a myth. Why is that myth propagated?
It's propagated because it's ideologically driven. It was ideologically driven by Ian Duncan Smith. It's ideologically driven by this government who want to actually divide people and get them against each other, the deserving and the undeserving, so they can push through their cuts.
This lady wasn't discussing some mythological thing, some politically driven thing, something floated by politics. She said her husband's carer, a professional, said this was a thing that she had seen and it upset her. Yeah. The lady did not say it's a huge thing. She said it's a thing.
Someone else has said it.
But it's a real thing. Why dismiss it?
It's the lack of perspective. If we look, benefit fraud does exist. According to the government's figures, it's 0.7% of all spending. And I just wish we spent as much time constantly talking about the bad behaviour of people at the bottom as the people at the top who avoid tax and industrial scale.
Mandy, you run a small business, don't you? Do you think reducing capital gains tax and corporation tax is a good thing? Will it boost jobs? Has it been good for you?
Yeah, so I agree with your statement that you made about the entrepreneurs. I work with entrepreneurs day in, day out, and most of them don't pay themselves a salary. So in terms of vulnerable people, I think the definition of who is vulnerable now has actually changed, and they are definitely vulnerable people. So for me...
Entrepreneurs are?
Yeah. Some of them can't pay their own salaries. But they have families, they have life that they have to attend to as well. So they're constantly looking at different ways that they can get some sort of cash break to help them grow and sustain their businesses. So this is a positive for them. It's just breathed a bit of optimism for them.
Do you feel it's a bit the people who do that, people who want to grow their businesses, are in danger of, by some people, getting a bit demonised?
Not when you're right at the bottom and you don't even have a salary. You're not thinking that deep. You're just thinking about how can I just sustain...
It's a matter of existence.
Exactly. How can I survive? At the moment, a lot of them are just in survival rates.
Rupert?
Yeah, I was absolutely fascinated with what Jonathan just said about the negative income tax, because the father of negative income tax was Milton Friedman, who proposed it for the Nixon administration, which wasn't taken up, and instead the Democrats argued that it was a very important principle that payment from the state should be related to work. So they put in place the earned income tax credit. Now you can have, say, which is better, the earned income tax credit or negative income tax. The fact is the earned income tax credit works. And I think it's 1,000 pities that the attempts at cutting tax credits in this country wasn't a reform of tax credits to make an earned income tax credit.
The difficulty, of course, with that issue is that you're defining work very narrowly as paid employment. A lot of people are doing very, very valuable things, contributing to society, contributing to community, but not actually receiving an income from it. And if you, in this day and age, want to go into something that's about public service, you generally have to take a very low salary in the voluntary sector or wherever, whereas if you're going into business, you get a very, very high salary if you're successful in that. That is valued far more than the possibly more worthwhile work that's been done on a voluntary basis.
Rabbi Ali, I'm going to give you the last word because there's more from Jonathan very, very shortly as we discuss climate change.
But we're not really addressing the question, which is, are we, societies should be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable people. And the fact is that they're a minority, they don't have a voice, and they actually can't get out there, they can't use the transport. We've made those points as well already. We need to say we take responsibility for making sure that the most vulnerable, the most marginal, are the ones that we actually support, that we agree as a society, regardless of all the political agenda involved, that that's something we all commit to. It's like a social contract.
A recalibration in a way.
Absolutely. We have a social contract and says, this is our responsibility. And, I hate to bring religion into this, but, go back...
On a Sunday morning.
Go back to the words of the prophets. The stranger, the orphan, the widow, repeated again and again. Why are those people repeated again and again? Because they are the people who are actually dependent on all of us acknowledging that we have a responsibility towards them.
Rabbi Ali, thank you.